Shanti, Shanti. Namah Shivaya, and welcome to another day of meditation. Today, there's a lot. I think one of the hardest things about teaching yoga is making the teachings relevant for the moment that you're in. In yoga, you constantly hear that from yoga teachers: be in the moment, be in the present, be in the now. And if you're from a tradition that's a spiritual tradition, uh, like any spiritual tradition, there should be a certain amount of understanding of healing within that tradition and the teachings. And healing always has to happen at the moment. A healing, it can't happen in the past, it can't happen in the future. It has that interaction, and that energetic reaction has to happen in the present. We're right now in a time period where there is so much suffering and pain and loss, and some of it is yes, because of the whole viral situation, but it's interesting to have this one health crisis that actually magnifies systemic historical trauma that has risen up. And it's important that, when we sit down to meditate, that, we don't really avoid these issues that are currently in front of us in a way that makes yoga look flip or shallow or trivial, right? Like you don't want it to just become like, oh, well, I'm going to talk about, um, the flavor of the week, or the flavor of the month, and not really take note of the current situation because it's much of a hot button, or it's a topic that's too big to tackle. And you know, uh, one of the things that we as Americans, and I can only speak for as an American, like what do I culturally deal with, and has been a part of my existence for the 56 years I've been on this planet in this body, and the issue of racism within this country has there's never been a day in my life that I'm not made aware of it in some way. And sometimes some things are karmic. Like I do believe in karma, and that in past lives, and that there's a reason why you've come into a form and you experience what you do in a life in a certain uh, time span, right? Uh, my I grew up in a very small town in Macon County, Alabama. And Macon County, Alabama is 95% African American. Tuskegee Institute is there, one of the biggest African American colleges in the country, an old college. And my parents were taught in the public school system, and they taught in a school system that had been burned to the ground because of integration, and where the school was called Macon County High School, and when the Supreme Courts of the nation in Lee versus Macon said that they could not restrict African American children from going to the public school systems because it was a white only school system, the town went in and they burned the school to the ground in this small town. And my parents, in around 1962, they were some of the first teachers that were rehired after the state rebuilt the school and integrated the school. And so it was growing up. I grew up in a very small town that was a very hot spot for racial division. It was isolated within the county. It was a town that was 50 white, 50% African American. The surrounding parts of the county were majority African American, and every day it was you felt the division between angry whites and that my parents taught in the school system. You were with constantly interacting with the black community who was hopeful for change, and you saw that there were just people who resisted that idea of change. And you were talking about people who were neighbors. They were living next door to each other. There wasn't some great social economic divide between the people in this community. It was a poor town, and it was the difference in skin color, just skin color. Education level was the same. Most people worked in blue-collar jobs or in sewing factories. There were a lot of sewing factories in the South at that time, and a lot of the women that I knew, adult women, all worked in sewing factories, black or white. Um, and it was always bizarre because there was so much anger. And then, you would go every Sunday. There was this ritual of going to church, right? That's kind of the American, like, fix it, right? Like, go to church, Yet the churches are segregated. There's the black churches, there's the white churches, and, they don't interact with each other, right? And what you found is that on Sunday, because of that segregation within spirituality, you saw where the historical systemic racism came out of. It came out of the thing that is so celebrated within the idea of American culture, which is its Christianity and connection to the Christian church. And we went to a church that was downtown, that was a white church. It was the Methodist church. My father insisted on going to a Methodist church because I come from a very long line of Methodist ministers, and my father just could not bear the thought of not being in the tradition that he was raised in and that his grandfather was a minister of, and further back. And yet the people that we went to church with were the people who were directly involved in the burning of the school. And there was this kind of like bizarre, surreal energy that kind of took place where we were kind of, as a family, on the outside of the clique within the church because my parents worked at the mixed race school, and then at the same time there was this kind of like artifice of brotherly love within the church, like because we were at church. It was hypocrisy. It was so hypocritical that for many years, like when I became an adult, because of the guilt my father felt as with his parents and my grandfather being a minister, we would constantly be in this environment every weekend, and I hated it. I hated going to these services and sitting for hours with people who I knew hated me because my parents worked at the black school. And my parents putting kind of on a show for to keep up appearances and so that they wouldn't lose face. And yet at the same time, there was just this incredible tension that I can't even really put into words. I've never been able to put it into words because it was so intense and I was so young that it was just impossible to understand the kind of tension and hate you felt in that environment. But what it did to me was, as soon as I became a young man and I left my parents' house, I like kind of have always avoided organized religion. I'm very suspicious of organized religion and how organized religion can be used in the manipulation of political agendas, especially, I see it greatly in this country, right? Because that's what I know. And, what we saw the other day was the worst of that kind of political religious theater happening in Washington. You know, leadership that is far from any kind of Christian values, using the images and the ideas of spirituality to promote power and a political agenda. And it's one of those kind of things that spirituality is here to heal you. And to help you understand that deep oneness of being. That our skin tone shouldn't matter. Our geographic location shouldn't matter. Our height, our weight, our gender, all these are very fleeting things that we'll let go of at some point. And yoga teaches us, don't attach yourself to those things. Don't attach yourself to the body, the mind. And for me, while some people have a hard time with those teachings of yoga, of you're not the body, you're not the mind, for me it was the one thing that healed me, because it seemed that everything I knew as a young man, from a spiritual point of view, the judgments were always being made on the body and the mind. That nobody really was there to heal the soul or to take note of the soul. It was all very superficial. So when I was introduced to the spiritualities of the East and Vedanta, especially, it was something that I never heard before, which is that the idea of judging each other and labeling each other's value based upon these things that are all going to fall away at the moment of death is only going to keep us in a cycle of suffering. That the goal of yoga and the practice is to see beyond those things. And that's hard. That's probably one of the hardest practices I've ever experienced. And starting to understand that when you delve into a tradition that says stop attaching yourself to the form, that you're working with a non-dualistic tradition, meaning that the soul is the most important thing, and that you're constantly looking for that light, or that internal energy that is connected to the divine, and that you're constantly seeing the divine in everything and in yourself. If I'm going to see it in everything around me, I got to see it also in myself, even in those people that I totally disagree with, and even with those people who have made me feel horrible about myself, are and harmed me, that I have to constantly keep seeing divinity within them, and remember that they're just as confused as I was. That they're in that same state, that they're measuring everything based upon the form, the color of my skin, my sexuality, my gender, my social economic situation, my educational situation, where I live, who I associate with, where I went to school. Like, these are the things that they're measuring you with, and all these things are unimportant. They're totally unimportant. Um, and as we go forward, that that is truly the form of healing that has to take place across the spectrum of the nation. That no matter what diversity you're from, diversity is something that should be celebrated, but also over diversity there has to be the celebration that of equality, of that sameness, of oneness. And if we can't see that, because that's what's hard to see, it's not the diversity, right? Diversity is easy to see. The sameness is hard to see. That's hidden. It's hidden with all of the layers of what we call culture, what we call individuality. And until we can celebrate that, you're always going to have, cops who see people on the street as the predator, or the bad guy. They're never going to be able to see that you have your knee on another child of God's, another piece of God's neck. That individual is the same as you. That there's oneness, there's not separation. And as long as religion and religious icons and imagery is able to be used as grotesque theater, then there's always going to be divisiveness within spirituality. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because I do believe that there's enough dialogue out there now, and enough information that's shared, that people are questioning these old modes, these old ideas, these ideas that have been put in motion since the first century. And they're looking at them and they're saying, is this really spiritually fulfilling? Is this really making us better? Is this really bringing us to a place of shanti, or peace? And as they look, then they're going to say, well, this may not work. And they may investigate other ideas and other traditions to actually find that idea of peace, internal peace, peace with those around me, but most of all, a type of peace that can only come from the divine, a universal peace. Um, and that's the purpose of the yoga practice, is to find that shanti, that unifying bliss amongst us all. So sitting up tall, take a moment and close your eyes. And allow the external world to drop away. And this idea of bringing the senses inward is that first step of understanding that the external world is not the real experience that you're looking for. Yes, you have a body, yes, you have a mind, but the body and the mind is only a rent-a-car. You got to give it back at some point. It's not your car. It's just something to kind of experience this laboratory that we call life, this learning process that we call life in. And it gives you the ability to understand the contrast between the external reality that changes, that is unstable, that is volatile, and the internal reality which is truth and never changes. It is the unifier. Allow the breath to deepen. Allow deep inhales and deep exhales. Inhale deep. Exhale deep. And as you inhale and exhale deeply, notice how the mind becomes calm. The fluctuations, the storms, the constant thoughts start to become under control. Inhale deeply. Exhale deeply. As you inhale, hear the sound of Om within your own self. Om. As you exhale, hear the vibrational sound of Om within yourself. Deeply inhale the sound of Om. Deeply exhale the sound of Om. As you inhale the sound of Om, see the symbol of Om within the mind's eye. As you exhale the sound of Om, see the symbol of Om within the mind's eye. Continue to the deep inhales and the deep exhales. Continue deep exhales. Silently tell yourself, I am not this body. Silently tell yourself, I am not this mind. Silently tell yourself, I am not these thoughts. Silently tell yourself, I am not these emotions. Tell yourself that you are Swayambakashit, self-illuminating, infinity, eternal, and everlasting. Inhale deeply for the sound of Om. Bring the hands together, rubbing the hands together, building heat within the hands. And bringing the hands to cup the eyes. Slowly open the eyes, bring the hands across the forehead, the top of the head, and the back of the neck. Bring the hands together in prayer, bowing the head slightly, allowing the forehead to touch the thumbs, giving thanks and praise for the teachings of yoga and those teachers who have brought us these teachings over the many, many centuries. Om Bolo Sadguru Bhagavan Ki Jai. Thank you all so much for being here today and meditating with me, and I will see you tomorrow for meditation.